part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
And welcome to another Reghi and Roda podcast powered by MGM Northfield Park right here on the Press Play Podcast Network. Shout out to our fantabulous producer, Ty Courts, who makes sure all of you out there in the podcastosphere get this wonderful, fabulous, entertaining, informative R&R podcast. And boy, do we have a good one for everybody out there today. Michael Reghi with a very special guest to talk some college football with us today.
Well, the very best. Not only a special guest, but the very best. Nobody has done it better for close to 40 years now. And of course, we hope you have. But if not, during the show, we're going to let you know how you can get your Phil Steele's 2023 College Football Preview magazine. It is the magazine that the experts can't do without. And if you're a college football fan at all, you'll find out so much more about your favorite team, its conferences, your favorite programs, coaches, what have you, as we say hello to the man that I feel very pleased to be able to call a good friend for many, many years, the incomparable Phil Steele. Hello, Phil.
Hey, Michael, Kenny, how the heck are you guys today?
We're great, man, because we're talking to you. We're going to get some knowledge for this upcoming college football season. As I told Michael, Michael hooked me up with a copy of your mag, and I've been reading it on a regular basis. But we got the source with us today, Michael Reghi. We got the man, the myth, the legend.
Well, listen, and when you talk about accuracy, what Phil does, and Phil, right to start, you know, because I get a lot of questions that would be to you, and one of them is, how do you do your top 40? And I want to make sure I got this right. When you do your top 40 in the preview magazine before the season begins, it comes out literally 3 to 4 months before the season begins. Your top 40 is based on how you believe each program will finish, not what talent rating you give them, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. There's two different ratings in the magazine. One of them is the power poll, which is I have 9 sets of power ratings, mold them all together, put them into one. And as an example, this year, Ohio State is number 2 in my power poll, right behind Georgia. Yet in my top 40, I have Ohio State number 5. And it's where I think they're going to finish in the year. And a lot of it is based on the schedule. You look at Michigan's schedule, look at Ohio State's schedule, 2 different animals. Michigan's got a much easier schedule. Ohio State has to play on the road. They have to play Notre Dame, which is going to be a tough game in South Bend, week 4 with a young quarterback. They also have to play Wisconsin on the road the week after they play Penn State. And then, of course, they have to travel to the Big House and play Michigan on the road. So due to the tougher schedule, I had Ohio State 5, despite the fact I've got them rated as the number 2 most talented team in the country in the power poll in the front of the magazine. So that's the difference between the two that are in the magazine.
Well, and Kenny, if think about this too. If you're a Big Ten fan, say, you're going to love, because Phil, again, your top 5 this year, Georgia, Ohio State 2, Michigan 3, Alabama 4, you got Penn State 5, right?
That's right. Penn State number 5 in the power polls. All 3 of those teams in the top 5. And really, the one thing I was looking at when I was doing my predictions is, you know, I'm going to make it easy. I'm going to take whichever one gets the other 2 at home. Yeah. Naturally, Penn State plays Ohio State on the road. Michigan plays Penn State on the road, and Ohio State plays Michigan on the road. So that sort of wiped that one out and didn't make it as easy.
Phil, I've been reading coming out of Columbus that as of yesterday, Ryan Day has not settled yet on his quarterback. Are you buying that, or do you think he knows who his quarterback is? They're just holding off on announcing Kyle McCord as the starter.
I think they're just holding off announcing Kyle McCord as the starter. And frankly, I think at the end of the season, Kyle McCord could very well be a Heisman candidate with the surrounding talent that they've got. My number 1 receiving core in the country, one of the top running back units in the country. Remember how banged up they were last year. I think Kyle McCord will have a big year. I do like the fact that Devin Brown's pushing him, but I don't know if that's legitimate. A lot of coaches this time of year are being a little wishy-washy with that quarterback situation. I think we'll hear it announced pretty soon.
Phil, while we're discussing Ohio State, let's just stay with the Buckeyes right now. You know, last year they brought in Jim Knowles. and to be the defensive coordinator. And everything was fine. I'd call them decent, not great, until once again the last 2 games of the football season. And Michigan rolled them by running the football, as Jim Harbaugh does. And then, of course, they played very, very well, but wound up getting beat by Georgia. And so, let's see, gave up what, 45 points to Michigan and 30 some odd to Georgia. Do you think in year 2 that Jim Knowles is going to find a way to be more consistent with his overall defense and not at the end of the season get smashed once again?
Big plays definitely were hurting Ohio State in those games against Michigan the last 2 years, and took up a lot of the yards. In fact, if you go back to the Michigan game last year, Ohio State was winning that thing at the half and was doing pretty well, and then those big plays just sort of overwhelmed them in the second half. I do think we're going to see improvement. If you go back to look at Jim Knowles when he was at Oklahoma State, it wasn't year 1, it wasn't year 2. I think it was there 4 years. The 4th year that defense was dynamic. He's got better talent here, so I don't think it's going to take 4 years to get to that level. It could very well be year 2. A big part of it's going to be the secondary. I've been disappointed with Ryan Day's secondaries the last 3 years. I mean, it always used to be in my rankings in the front of the magazine. I would have Ohio State rated in the top 10 of my pass defense rankings almost every year, top 20 at the worst. But under Day, the last 3 years, they've been number 101, number 47, and number 59 in the pass D rankings. So if they can shore that up, the pass defense rankings, I think they have the talent in front seven. Remember last year, the linebacking core was a big-time question mark coming into the season. No longer a big-time question mark with Steele, Chambers, Eichenberg, Carter. And we're all waiting for C.J. Hicks to make that big impact. He was the number 1 rated linebacker out of high school. So I think the talent's there. It's year 2. We should definitely see improvement on the defense.
With the Buckeyes and that team up north, as they like to say, Michigan, Ohio State dominated for 9 years. Jim Harbaugh almost lost his job. He keeps his job, and now he's won 2 games in a row and has dominated the Buckeyes. What's turned that rivalry back into Michigan's favor right now, Phil?
You know, I think it was the way they have come back in both games, you know, and the first game winning it, of course, in Ann Arbor, I thought gave them confidence, which is something that they may have lacked in the past. And going over when I talked to Coach Aranda at Baylor, he said that was the difference between Baylor 2 years ago getting to the January 1 bowl game and then last year actually having a losing season, is that his team lacked the confidence he felt in the second half of the year and didn't make the plays and maybe thought they couldn't. So I think Michigan gained a lot of confidence from that upset 2 years ago in Ann Arbor, carried it forward to Columbus, and now just play with a completely different level. And for the record, I think this is Jim Harbaugh's best team he's put on the field. In fact, if you take a look at all the title contenders this year, they're one of the few that actually has a returning starting quarterback in J.J. McCarthy. And you look at the talent they have. They got my number 1 set of running backs. They've won the Joe Moore Award. Very pleased to be a member of the Joe Moore Award voting committee. The only non-offensive lineman on that committee, offensive lineman or offensive line coach on the committee. They're my number 2 offensive line heading into the season, and a great schedule. It's going to be a tough task for Ohio State this year.
Penn State, Phil, you know, you and I have had a lot of discussions, and James Franklin is a lightning rod, but he too this year seems to have just a wealth, a large amount of talent. When you look at Allen and Singleton, they're 2 outstanding young running backs. I think they're very close, if not rivaling, Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards at Michigan. How do you see Penn State? And with a young man from right here at Northeast Ohio now, that played his high school football in Medina. Kenny knows him very well. Drew Aller, now the starting quarterback, taking over for the graduated Sean Clifford. Is it more about they just got? I mean, they play in the toughest division in football, I think. But can they find a way to beat either Michigan or Ohio State this year? Because they're going to have to win one of those football games. Yes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They definitely have to win at least one if they're going to make that big push, if not both. You go back 2 years ago, the game against Michigan, they were at home. Michigan, at the end of the game, trailing, drives down the field. And ironically, the touchdown came on a play from their quarterback to Eric All, and both
Cade
those guys now
McNamara.
play for Iowa.
Yes, both of them. You're right.
That's
Yep.
interesting. But so they almost beat Michigan 2 years ago. They've given Ohio State quite some battles. You get to the end of the third quarter, a lot of these games, a game is close. Ohio State pulls away at the end. So I think they have the talent. The one thing going over the team with Coach Franklin this year, you look at the defense, they are a legitimate 3 deep at almost every single position on the defense. I send the coaches over my team sheets. They have every player on the team and their PS numbers, where they ranked out of high school, all their stats and everything. And we get to the third layer on defense, and these guys are potential starters for a lot of teams. And offensive line is also in the best shape it's really been under Franklin. So if Alar can step up and do the job that everybody at Penn State has thought he could, and he got experience, got his feet wet last year with those running backs that they have, this is a very dangerous Penn State team that I think can play with the big boys. The game that surprised me, I think if you take a look at Penn State against Michigan and Ohio State the last 2-3 years, the one that really surprised me was their game against Michigan last year, because the Wolverines just dominated that game. Yeah. I don't think that'll happen again this year, and I think a better defensive front seven will help them slow down that Michigan run.
Yeah, I believe it was 427 yards rushing for Michigan last year. So that can't happen again for them to find a way against either Michigan or Ohio State. Kenny, go ahead.
No, happy to have Phil Steele with us. His magazine, Phil Steele's College Football Preview 2023, 350 plus pages of information you need if you're a college football fan because of your team, or now that wagering is legal in the Buckeye State and at Bushwood Country Club. By all means, you want to have this at your fingertips for the upcoming season. And Phil, with let's put a bow on the Big Ten. Is it a 3-team race right there? Have we touched on the 3 teams that have a chance to win the Big Ten and get to a playoff?
I'm going to throw 2 more teams at you. And number 1 is Wisconsin. They are actually my number 1 surprise team in the magazine, or a team that's not going to be ranked in the preseason top 10. In fact, they barely made the top 25. That actually has a shot at making the playoff. And, Kenny, I write the magazine in a 3 write-through process. The first write-through, I start the magazine the Sunday after Thanksgiving, when some team's season is complete. And what I do at that point is I've just watched every game. I've got 12 TVs in front of me during the season, and I've lived every game, and I've kept up with all the teams. But now I just focus on one team as opposed to trying to keep up with 133. And I go back and read every article that was written about that team during the course of the season. And then I do the first right through of the magazine, which is I talk about each position. I say, what kind of shape were they heading into last year? What happened? What kind of shape are they heading into going into this year? Well, after the first right through process, with them bringing in Phil Longo from North Carolina, I wasn't wild about Wisconsin. In fact, I thought, you're messing up. I mean, Wisconsin wins its games by running the football. But after the third right through process, which is talking to the head coaches and talking to Coach Fickell, he assured me they are not going full-blown air raid offense this year. In fact, if you go back and look at Wisconsin the last 3 years, they haven't even averaged 5 yards per carry, which is surprising to me. And he feels that's because teams have been able to stack 8-9 players in the box. Well, they bring in a transfer from SMU and Tanner Mordecai, a quarterback. They bring in Longo, and he feels this is going to open up the run lanes for Braylon Allen and Ches Malusi, and that they will be more effective running the football, getting over that 5.0 yards per carry mark, and convince me they're not going to abandon the run. Defensively, they go from 3 returning starters to 8. You look at the overall experience. I did a great article on philsteele.com. Check out my blogs for that. It's on the experience level. And teams that go from low experience, which Wisconsin was last year, they were number 124 or something like that, all the way up to top 20 like they are this year. Those teams make a big jump. And then you look at their schedule. Their 5 road games this year. And off the top of my head, I can't name them all, but Washington State, Illinois, Minnesota, all 5 games are winnable. Their toughest 2 opponents are Iowa and Ohio State. They catch Ohio State the week after Penn State. I think Wisconsin's got a chance to be a real sleeper. And of course, Fickell took a group of 5 team to make the playoff. So watch for Wisconsin this year, especially if that mix on offense takes effect. And then the other one is Iowa. When Cade McNamara entered the transfer portal, the first thing that popped in my head within 5 seconds was, go to Iowa. Perfect fit. And guess what? He lands at Iowa, which is the perfect fit. They have the defense. Phil Parker's the defense coordinator. They've got one of the best defenses in the country. They've got my number 2 rated special teams in the country. And now offensively, they've got McNamara. They've got Eric All at the tight end that comes in. They've got now a veteran offensive line. When I've talked to Coach Ferentz each of the last 3 years, he's been concerned about the O-line, likes the O-line this year. You're going to see this team, which averaged 31 points per game back in 2020, get back to having an offense, and that makes them dangerous. The only reason I didn't pick them to win the West was that they have to play both Penn State and Wisconsin on the road. But those are two teams that could be in contention, Wisconsin and Iowa.
Couldn't agree with you more. Phil Steele, our guest. Phil, for those of all of our viewers and listeners who do not yet, as we're speaking of, have your Phil Steele college football preview for 2023, how can they go get one right now?
I appreciate that, Michael. In years past, you could go to Walmart, grocery stores, places like that and get it. But this year it's exclusively at 2 brick and mortar stores. You have to go to either Barnes & Noble or Books A Million. Both have copies. We gave them plenty of copies this year, but it's the only 2 brick and mortar stores, Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. So save your gas money. Now, you can also go to philsteele.com. And when you go to philsteele.com and order the hard copy, I'm going to charge you a shipping charge. It costs to mail things. But I'm also going to give you the digital magazine absolutely free. And the digital magazine's actually updated all the way through September. As an example, on the Northwestern page of the digital magazine, we list David Braun as the head coach, not Pat Fitzgerald. So it's all updated all the way through September. We circle all the players that are out for the year. So Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, or philsteele.com.
You don't have it. Yep. Make sure you go get it. If you don't have it, you will certainly relish reading everything that Phil puts out.
All right, let's do this, guys. Let's get a break in right now. We broke down the Big Ten with Phil, but we need to find out about all the other teams. Is this going to be the year that a team wins a national championship for the 3rd year in a row with Georgia? What does Nick Saban have in store? What about Dabo Swinney and Clemson and other sleepers out there? When we return to the R&R podcast powered by MGM Northfield Park, we'll break that all down for you right after this.
What's up, everyone? I'm Holly Wetzel.
And I'm Tybus Powell.
And we are your hosts of The Orange is Oranger, a Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. We give you all the dog pound coverage that you'll need to get you through the regular season, hopeful postseason, and I'd say off-season, Tybus, but is there really ever an off-season for this team?
Thankfully for our podcast, Holly, there really never is when it comes to the Cleveland Browns. Don't miss our breakdown of each week's matchup, game recaps, and any and all news out of Berea to feed your Browns appetite. As we know, Holly, dogs gotta eat.
Yes, they do. So hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode of the Orange is Oranger, Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
Hey, the Roadman Kenny Roda here for the R&R podcast, and a shout out to our sponsor, MGM Northfield Park. Love having them on board once again this year, but hey, check this out. It started on Monday, August 14th. There will be a 2-week live racing break at MGM Northfield Park, so no live racing between August 14th through the 25th. Live racing will return to MGM Northfield Park on Saturday, August 26th with at 6 p.m. post time, and as always, free admission, free parking every day at Northfield Park, returning on Saturday, August 26th.
Looking for new insights on the Cleveland sports scene with a unique side of Cleveland sports history? Then you found the perfect podcast. I'm John Sable.
And I'm Scott Sable, and we're hosts of the Sable Brothers on the Baseline podcast, a podcast about Cleveland sports, but not your typical podcast about the land's sports teams. Join us as we embark on a journey of sharing a unique and historical side of Cleveland sports history with the help of some former Cleveland sports stars and other historical figures.
All right here on the Sable Brothers on the Baseline podcast, part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
And we return to the R&R podcast powered by MGM Northfield Park here on the Press Play Podcast Network. honored to have the genius, the expert, the guru, whatever you want to call him. He knows college football better than anybody. Phil Steele, his magazine is out. Phil Steele's College Football Preview 2023. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and philsteele.com is where you can get it. And Michael and Phil, we did the Big Ten last segment. Let's dive into your top 10 teams, Phil, if you will, and who has a shot at actually winning a national championship this year outside of maybe 2 or 3 of those teams in the Big Ten.
I think all 10 of my top 10 teams have a shot at actually winning a championship if things go right. I mean, look at last year. TCU found itself in the championship game, and a lot of it is how the season progresses. My number 10 team is Notre Dame, and Notre Dame, it surprised me that they weren't on the preseason AP top 10 list. But when you look at the Irish, they've got a great defense. Marcus Freeman had that defense last year. They were one of the top units in the country. They've got 8 starters back defensively. Offensively last year, they went through the year with basically a backup quarterback. Well, now this year, they've got Sam Hartman, one of the best quarterbacks in the country coming in. They've got one of my top offensive lines, one of the top sets of running backs, led by Estime, and then a receiving core that's been upgraded this year. Special teams, I actually rate them right at the top of as well. So they are a complete team. They get Ohio State at home. They get USC at home. And by the way, when they play USC, the home team's won 9 of the last 10 games. So a home field advantage in November, chilly South Bend is a nice advantage to have. They do have to play Clemson on the road, but even if they lose that game, I think Notre Dame has a shot at actually making a playoff this year. It's a very dangerous game for Ohio State week 4. Number 9, I've got LSU. And when you look at LSU, Brian Kelly in his first year got the team better than I expected. Now this year, it's the second year. They've got 17 returning starters. They're one of the few top 10 teams that actually has a veteran quarterback coming back in Jaden Daniels. This is a stronger LSU team. They do have to play Florida State at a neutral site early in the year. They play Ole Miss on the road. They also have to play Alabama on the road, which is going to be tough. But LSU, I think, is going to be a threat once again. Remember, they're the defending SEC West champs, for crying out loud. And then I'll throw a third one out at you in Florida State, my number 8 team in the country. Mike Norvell, what a difference a year makes. Last year at this time, Mike Norvell was on the hot seat, coming off 2 losing seasons. Now he's got a team that's near the top. They've got Jordan Travis back at QB. And, they rank in my top units in 7 categories, all the offense and defense categories: quarterback, running back, receiver, offense line, defense line, linebacker, and DB. The thing that's surprising is they rank in my top 15 in all 7 position categories. They've got practically everybody back. They've added in transfers, a very dangerous Florida State team. The only reason I didn't pick them higher, they do have to play Clemson on the road. I'll take a break for a second and see if you guys have any questions, and I'll continue on the top 10.
Florida State, I'm with you. I really like Florida State a lot. And, as you said, Jordan Travis, I think that most college football folks undervalue him a little bit, Phil. I think he's got the goods. You got to have tremendous quarterback play. I think Florida State's got it. So is that with Travis, is that part of the reason that you've got him with a shot maybe to surprise and getting the CFP come late December?
The amazing thing about Jordan Travis, you go back and if you watched him in his first year, remember he was a running quarterback. I think he ran for like 232 yards on the season and only threw for 69. They used him as more of a gimmick. Then the next year he hit like 56%. Then he hit 60%, 64%. He's gotten better every year. He continues that improvement. Watch out for Jordan Travis, and they have the talent.
Kenny, I got to ask you real quick. Did your ears cringe when Phil was discussing Notre Dame? Now, we've got a lot of Notre Dame fans, of course, and the R&R podcast, but all of them know that my esteemed buddy and partner, Kenny Roda, is not one who sings cheer, cheer for old Notre Dame at any time.
No, the Crying Irish are my most hated team, not named Michigan. Okay, so those are the two. When Michigan and Notre Dame play, I want it to go like 45 overtime so they all get exhausted and they're affected the next week, Phil. But yes, I'm concerned about that. I'm with Phil. You had Ohio State in your top 40 at number 5. I think they're going to lose at least 2 games in the regular season this year, Phil. Unproven quarterback, offensive line that's questionable. and that defense, as Michael pointed out in our first segment under Jim Knowles, I'll throw Maryland in, Michael. Maryland put 30 on them before Michigan and Georgia put 40 and 40 on them, right? So that defense worries me as well. So I think the Buckeyes are going to come up short this year again and lose 2 games, and one of them might be to Notre Dame in the regular season. But the team I like, Phil, and I'm looking at wagering on them, and I'll see where you end up having them in your top 10. That USC Notre Dame game is huge for me because I think USC could be the team that gets to the Final Four and, dare I say, the championship game this year, because I think if their quarterback doesn't get hurt last year, they're playing in the college football playoff.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head, Kenny, and we'll continue on. Number 7 is my USC team, and I think you hit it perfect. If he doesn't get injured, he took 6 sacks in that game. He didn't take sacks all season. He was an escape artist, and that really changed the outlook of the Utah game, and they probably would have won the game and been in the playoff last year. When I went over the team with Coach Lincoln Riley, they'd made some big-time improvements defensively. They brought in a Georgia transfer on the defensive line at the defense tackle spot, 315 pounds. He was my number 6 rated defensive line out of high school. They brought in a Texas A&M defensive end, 295 pounds. I like the size up front now. And he was my number 6 rated defensive lineman out of high school. I think the defense will be much improved. They brought in Oklahoma State's one of their top tacklers from last year. Offensively, they're potent. And, the schedule-wise, they do play Notre Dame and Oregon on the road. But Pac-12-wise, they caught some breaks because last year the biggest teams in the Pac-12 usually won their home games. They only have one road game. Oregon is their toughest road game this year. So I think the Trojans do have that chance. They don't have to play great defense, just good defense, because that offense is very explosive. Number 6, I've got Penn State. We went over Penn State a little bit in the first segment. And same thing with Ohio State. We went over them. I have to agree with Ken. That schedule is tough this year, having to play the teams they do, especially Notre Dame early, Wisconsin the week after Penn State, Michigan on the road. Number 4, I've got Alabama. And with Alabama, hey, I'm not going to be the guy that doesn't pick Nick Saban to make the playoff. Okay, the last time
you're a smart man.
Last time he came in number 4 in the AP poll, guess what? National title. Last time he wasn't preseason number 1, guess what? National title. And while they have 3 different quarterbacks, and none have taken the job yet, they've got 3 capable quarterbacks, and the talent is there, as you know, and the schedule sets up well. I think 2 of their toughest games this year, LSU and Tennessee, they get them both at home. They do have to play A&M on the road in College Station, which could be tricky if you're looking for a team that's going to be really on the rise. We may talk about them later, but I picked Alabama to make the playoff this year because I'm not going to be the guy that doesn't pick Nick Saban. And then number 3, I've got Michigan. I explained earlier in the first segment that I think this is Harbaugh's best team, and they have the best schedule of the top 3 teams in the Big Ten. Number 2, I got Clemson, and Clemson I think is flying under the radar. I believe they're number 9 in the AP poll. Saw a lot of preseason top 10s, didn't even have them. But when I talked to Coach Sweeney, we were going over the team. Remember that 2018 defensive line they had, which was one of the best ever in college football. He said this year's defensive line doesn't have the talent of that 2000, or not the talent, but doesn't have the big names of the 2018, but they're actually more talented and more experienced than 2018. Boom, my ears perked up. I made them, and looking at the talent, going over the D-line with them, I made them my number 1 defensive line in the country. They've got one of the best sets of linebackers. Cade Klubnik, I think, is going to do great at quarterback this year. They've got an outstanding and improved offensive line, improved receiving core, dangerous running backs. And Clemson's toughest 2 games, they get Notre Dame at home, and they get Florida State at home. And they've only lost 1 home game in Death Valley in the last 6 years. I got Clemson number 2 in the country, and then really went out on a limb here with my number 1 team, guys. I picked Georgia. And, when you look at Georgia, they're a team that last year, going over the team with the coaching staff, they were concerned about the experience level on the defensive line. I mean, they had 9 guys lost to the NFL. This year, they lost 5 guys to the NFL, and not as concerned. So this is going to be one of the best defenses in the country. Offensively, I think Carson Beck wins the job, becomes a dark horse Heisman Trophy candidate because they've got my number 1 rated offensive line, number 4 set of receivers, number 6 set of running backs, and the schedule. I mean, they're going to be a double-digit favorite in the first 10 games. By the time Week 11 rolls around, Carson Beck is no longer a first-year starter. He's got 10 games under his belt, and that's when they play at Tennessee, their toughest game on the regular season schedule. I'm calling for him to be the first three-peat national champ since Minnesota did it back in 1934 to 1936.
Isn't that incredible? It has been that long. So that's what, 9 decades, right? Since the last time anybody three-peated. But Phil, listen, I'm in agreement with you. And to me, Kirby Smart is, I might have him as my very best coach in college football. You can say, well, yeah, Reg, they won 2 straight now. Well, no, I'm talking about everything that goes into program building, developing players, the ability, of course, to recruit, and then can you X and O it on game day? Phil, I think Kirby Smart does as well as anybody.
Yeah, and motivation. I mean, convincing his team that they were lowly picked last year. This guy knows motivation, I'll tell you that much.
Yep. No question about it. So there you have it. So Georgia, for the first time since 1934 to 1936. Hey, Kenny, we got a minute to get in. All our MAC friends are waiting to hear Phil. So, okay, Phil, again, Toledo and Ohio played the MAC championship game last year. Phil, I've started to do all my preparation to call a lot of Mid-American Conference games. And, of course, I got a feeling that we might have a repeat of a year ago at Ford Field in Detroit with that Toledo and Ohio playing for the MAC championship game again. How do you see it potentially?
Those are the 2 I picked in the magazine. I think there are definitely contenders, though. You look at the East, Miami of Ohio. I remember going over the team with Coach Martin last year, and he was like, well, we just lost 4 of our best ever defensive ends. And now this year, they're much more experienced defensively, offensively. They lost Gabbert last year, as you recall. They had to go to a backup quarterback who struggled a little bit early and then got better as the season went on. Now both guys are back. I think Miami is going to be your primetime contender in the East, along with Buffalo. Don't sleep on the Bulls. I like the job that they're doing at Buffalo right now. So I think all 3 of those teams are clearly in contention in the East. It wouldn't surprise me if any of the 3 won it, but I did go with Ohio to win it. Toledo looks like the best team, the most talented. And if they can win their opening game against Illinois, they could very well run the table this year and maybe be the first ever MAC team to be that top group of 5 team to get there. So you're sort of rooting for them. Remember last year with Toledo, they clinched the West a little early. In those final 2 games, they rested DeQuan Finn to get him healthy for the championship game. They lost both games. Both were upsets. Right. So if those 2 losses come off the schedule, all of a sudden Toledo's record last year would have been a lot better. Finally got over the bowl game hump as well. So I think Toledo talent-wise is there. I'm also not sleeping on Northern Illinois. I like the job that Hammock's doing there. They've been to this every time, up, down, up, and this is the year to be up. I think they're going to surprise a lot of folks this year and actually contend with Toledo.
Yep, I think you're right on. And Mo Linguist and his Buffalo Bulls as well, another football team that again would not surprise me because after that 0-3 start last year, they rolled off 7 consecutive wins, and I think he's got the type of roster that will allow them to, Phil, be an 8, if not 9, 10-win football team this year as well. So I'll include Buffalo in there with an opportunity to get to Ford Field in Detroit and play for a MAC championship as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you go back to his first year. The amazing thing about Mo Linguist's first year is they let go of the entire coaching staff, and they didn't really get to meet with the team until fall. So it was, it went through a huge learning process early on, got better as it went. And now this is like their second real year as head coach, even though it's his 3rd year. They are a definite threat.
Bill, we have a few minutes left here, so I saved this to make sure if we had time, I'd bring it up with you. Caleb Williams, USC wins the Heisman Trophy last year, 3rd one that Lincoln Riley now has produced. What about this year's race for college football's greatest trophy? And I was lucky enough recently to hang out with the only 2-time winner, Archie Griffin, as he was inducted into the National High School Football Hall of Fame. So could we see Archie get some company, or do you see somebody else picking up the hardware this year as the best player in college football?
MGM Northfield, do they take sports bets?
Yes, they do.
They do.
Okay. Well, if you're over at MGM Northfield and they're
nice.
the Heisman thing and they give you an option of Caleb Williams or the field, I'm going to take the field. And here's the reasons why.
Okay.
Caleb Williams is not only competing with every other player in college football, but he's competing with himself from last year. And you go back and look at his numbers, they were ridiculous. And if he has anything less, I mean, he had 40 plus touchdown passes, 10 plus touchdown runs, I think only 5 interceptions on the year. Anything less than that, people will be, he had an off year, and be looking for somebody else to get there. And generally, the Heisman winner is going to come from one of the top teams in the country. If USC maybe loses against Notre Dame or Oregon, it would be a struggle at that point. So I would actually take the field. I think there's a reason that we've only had the one repeat winner of the Heisman Trophy, and I would take the field. And if you're looking for some long shots, the 2 long shots I'm going to throw out at you would be Sam Hartman of Notre Dame. As mentioned, I think Notre Dame is a team that could surprise a lot of folks this year. And if you're the top quarterback for one of those teams, he's never had surrounding talent like he's got here at Notre Dame, then I think he would be it. And then the other one's Carson Beck of Georgia. You're the quarterback for the number 1 team in the country. I believe the current odds are something like 18-1. It'd be worth a little bit on that, because like I said, by the end of the season, when they're playing Tennessee, when they're playing Alabama, he'll be a veteran quarterback by that point, and he's got a great supporting cast.
Where does Marvin Harrison fit in maybe to the Heisman race? Does it depend on how well whoever the starting quarterback is for Ohio State plays to give him a shot at this as a wide receiver?
I think he does have a shot. It seems like the Heisman voters, I, of course, am a Heisman voter. I don't change my outlook. I go for the best player, but it seems like the Heisman voters are trying to look for non-quarterbacks lately.
Okay.
They're getting more and more votes. So it seems like some of the Heisman voters are doing that, which would make Harrison a legitimate threat at the wide receiver spot. And he is definitely the most talented wide receiver in college football.
Michael, you got anything else for the living legend, Phil Steele, here before we let him go?
Oh, he's living the grand life, the big life, as we get ready to start college football on August the 26th this year. Phil, this is our final year for the 4-team college football playoff. Next year, following the 2024 season, 12 football teams will make the playoffs. It'll be more like, quite honestly, the NFL playoff format, with that many squads getting an opportunity to ultimately win a championship. What say Phil Steele? You like it or not?
Well, Michael, I've always been a proponent of the 4-team playoff. In fact, prior to the 4-team playoff coming around, I said my perfect playoff system, I did this for 10 years before it came into fruition, wrote about it in the magazine every year, would be a 4-team playoff where you go 1 against 4, 2 against 3. You get the best teams in the championship games. You don't have to worry about staying healthy. There was a time in the FCS, I think about 8 years ago, where the 3rd place team in a division in the Colonial Conference made it to the championship game 2 out of 3 years, because they were the healthiest team that made it through the gauntlet of the playoffs. I don't want to see the healthiest team win the championship. I want to see the best teams. But I'll say this, there's no sense fighting it. We're going to a 12 teams, so I'm going to get my popcorn. I love watching college football. I'll watch all the extra playoff games. We'll see how it shakes out.
Phil Steele.
And Phil, what about the shakeup? In the conferences, this will be the last year the Pac-12 exists, right? So whoever wins the title this year is going to be the last Pac-12 champion, in my opinion. And the way teams are moving around and everything, along with what Michael pointed out with the college football playoff next year. What are your thoughts on that before we let you go?
It's actually changed the last couple of weeks. When Oklahoma and Texas went to the SEC, and USC and UCLA went to the Big Ten. At that point, I said, in 1995, the first year of my magazine, I actually had the Southwest Conference in there. It was the final year of the Southwest Conference.
Wow.
And at that time, when Texas was going to the Big 8 and things like that were happening, I was like, oh, and then it all worked out pretty well. So I'm like, we could survive this. But now, what the hell are we doing with 20-team conferences? What are we going to break them into divisions, have mini conferences inside the conferences? I don't know how it's going to look. The good thing is the next year's magazine, I'll have an entire off season to break it down, but I would much rather forecast a 6 or 7 team division than try to forecast a conference from 1 through 20.
Boy, it makes it more difficult, to be sure. I will say this, Ken, Phil, I think you both agree, though, but if you are a fan of, I use the term blue bloods, you got to be real happy, because, Phil, when they go to 12, I cannot see a year I just can't. I know they play the games on the field. I can't see a year where a 12-team field, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, they're going to be in every year, Phil. And some of those years they'll be 10-2, if not 9-3, but they'll get in. And so if you like that, then I think this is something that you're going to think is the greatest thing ever, because all those big boys, they're going to be in every year.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting. I'll tell you that much. And like you said, there's no way, if you go back and look at the playoff format, that Ohio State doesn't make the playoff every single year.
Yep,
Bill,
exactly right.
For our listeners that are going to pick up a copy of this, because they'd be idiots not to if they're college football fans, or like I said, if you're going to plan on wagering on games. How many head coaches did you talk to again? What did you tell me before we started all this out of all the schools?
Yeah, this year I talked to 123 of the 133 head coaches out there. And it's not just, hey, coach, how you doing? How do you feel about your team? I send them my team pages, got every single player on their team. We go over every player. So the average call, I mean, some of them lasted 2+ hours, but the average call was like 1 hour per coach. 123 of the 133 teams this year. And also this year, you mentioned the wagering. We actually have an FCS magazine where I have 2 full pages on every FCS team.
There you go.
The best.
There is so much more value wagering on the FCS games, because nobody knows anything about them, rather than this week's big game, Alabama's playing Georgia. Everybody knows everything about the game. That line's super tight. You find some great line value in the FCS. So that's available right now on philsteele.com.
And I know that for a fact because we have Chris Van Dyne on from North Coast Sports on the Kenny and JT show on a weekly basis. And he tells us every week, hey, I can pick the games you want me to and give you my thoughts. But if you really want to make some money, that's where you can do it. Right, Phil, on the FCS?
I agree 100%. That is where, and you would have so much knowledge, because I give you first time ever, we put out 2 full pages on every FCS team.
That's fantastic.
Nobody does it better.
No, he's the best, Reg. He just is. You look at this magazine. He said he started back in 95, and it's gotten bigger and better, more detailed each and every year. Phil, again, for our listeners out there that are hearing this and saying, all right, I got to go get this, where can they get a copy of Phil Steele's College Football Preview 2023?
Yeah, the only brick and mortar stores to get it at right now are Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. They all still have the copies available. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. Don't go to Walmart. Don't go any other places. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. Or you can go to philsteele.com. And at philsteele.com, if you order the hard copy, I give you the digital copy, which is updated all the way through September for free. You can also order the FCS version. You could join Inside the Press Box. You could get in a Phil Steele Plus and much more. Just go to philsteele.com to find out about that. Or Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. But I tell you what, once Barnes & Noble and Books A Million sell out, and they're getting close, you're not going to be able to get the magazine this year. So get out there and get it now.
I've been with Phil Steele in his pristine offices when he's talked to almost every college football coach in the game. Nothing's better. Nobody does it better. Phil, we greatly appreciate you taking the time to join us, and get back on the phones and talk to some coordinators now for the rest of the day, so you can continue to update everybody by day. All right?
There you go, Michael. Hey, I appreciate you guys inviting me on. I consider you both good friends, and appreciate the fact you had me on your podcast.
Of course.
Thanks so much, Phil. You're the best. We'll talk again down the road. There he is, the best in the business. You're crazy if you don't grab a copy of this magazine. If you're a college football fan, go get it. Like you said, before they sell out at Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. Phil Steele, the best in the business. Reg, great insight from Phil. We will definitely be talking college football throughout the year. We'll see Ohio State early on. They're at Notre Dame. That'll be a big test for them. Michigan, is Harbaugh going to coach those first 4 games, or is he getting suspended? We're waiting to see what officially comes down with that. A lot happening in the Big Ten and with college football. We'll be breaking it down throughout the year on the R&R podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get Phil back on as the season wears on as well to see if he continues to hit at 86% of same thing he's done for the past decades now. And nobody comes up with a higher percentage of not only winners, but his top 40, and as well as season wows on down to his top 5. So we'll have Phil on again as the season wears on. Kenny, love talking college football with the very best.
Yeah, he is the best. All right, that'll do it for this edition of the R&R podcast. Stay tuned in the not-too-distant future. We're going to preview the Browns as they get ready for their opener against the Cincinnati Bengals. That's just around the corner. Will Joe Burrow play in that game? We'll have to wait and see. How's Deshaun Watson looking? We're going to dive into each and every team in the AFC North in the coming podcast. And, of course, we'll wrap up each and every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, whenever they play game with the Browns with the R&R postgame podcast as well. So a lot to get to, a lot to talk about in the coming weeks right here on the Reghi and Roda podcast, brought to you by MGM Northfield Park on the Press Play Podcast Network.